Why did they all laugh? That was the first thing she noticed, the sound. It wasn't cruel in a loud way. It was quieter, sharper, the kind of laughter that cuts because it hides insecurity behind confidence. She'd heard that sound before, in rooms filled with boys who thought war was an adventure and arrogance was armor. Chief Anya Sharma stood beneath the fluorescent hum of the kill house lights, her hands moving with mechanical precision over the M17 service pistol. She didn't look at them, not once, not at the smirking cadet who had just called her ma'am as if it were an insult, not at the ring of eager faces, watching her like a curiosity on display. Her thumb brushed the magazine release, metal on metal, smooth, practiced. Every click, every motion was deliberate. She was older than most of them, though the years hadn't dulled her movements. They'd only refined them, filed away the waste until what remained was pure function. From the observation deck above, a man with 4 stars on his shoulders leaned closer to the glass. Admiral Hayes. His face was a battlefield of old scars and forgotten wars, but his eyes, those eyes were sharp, alive. He saw what the cadets didn't. The way her stance wasn't learned, it was ingrained. She wasn't standing in that kill house. She was returning to it. Honestly, Cadet Lieutenant Commander Reynolds sneered, packing like a showman in front of his audience. What is this? Bring your daughter to work day. Laughter again, obedient, uncertain. He gestured at her sidearm. That pistol's heavier than you are, ma'am. A ripple of amusement spread. The kind of laughter meant to reassure themselves. They were on the right side of the joke. But Anya didn't react. Her face remained still, a blank page on which none of their mockery could leave a mark. Inside her mind was a quiet, clinical room. She counted her breaths, adjusted her grip, measured the tension in her forearm. They thought she was ignoring them out of fear. In truth, she was simply elsewhere, already inside the scenario, rehearsing physics, angles, trajectories. The Admiral watched in silence. To him, this wasn't entertainment. This was revelation. Reynolds strutted before the cadets, his voice echoing off the concrete. All right, people, standard active assailant hostage rescue. 2 hostiles, 1 hostage. Speed, surprise, violence of action. He turned toward her, stopping inches away. You'll be our point man. The words carried the smugness of someone sure he was setting up a lesson at her expense. Since you're so eager to play with the big boys, let's see what you've got. She didn't answer. She seated the magazine with a sharp metallic click. That tiny sound filled the cavernous space, a punctuation mark on his arrogance. A few cadets shifted uneasily, the laughter thinned. Her movements were slow, precise, almost reverent. She adjusted her holster strap, gave a small nod to the range officer. She wasn't saying, "I'm ready." She was saying, "I accept." Reynolds misread it, of course. He thought he'd found hesitation. "Problem, Mom," he taunted. "Door's right there. No one'll judge you for backing out." He smiled, enjoying his own cruelty. She finally lifted her eyes, but not to him. She looked at the steel door of the kill house. Her gaze wasn't emotional, it was mathematical. It measured weight, hinges, opening arc. She wasn't thinking about pride, she was solving an equation. "Shooter is hot," the range officer's voice cracked through the intercom. A red light blinked above the door, pulsing like a heartbeat. The cadets fell silent. Even Reynolds folded his arms, waiting for failure to prove him right. Admiral Hayes leaned closer, eyes narrowing. He saw the change before anyone else did, the shift in her weight, the way she drew a breath so shallow it barely stirred her chest. When the intercom barked execute, 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 she moved. No dramatic sprint, no wasted motion. One heartbeat she was still, the next she was gliding forward, hand on the handle, body coiled. She cracked the door, not wide, just enough. Slicing the pie, Hayes murmured to himself. She cleared the corner with a flick of her eyes and muzzle, then flowed inside. 2 sharp pops. Silence. 2 more. Then nothing. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. Outside, the cadet stared at the door as if it had swallowed her. Reynolds blinked, trying to compute what he'd heard. He'd expected chaos, scrambled footsteps, hesitant shots. Instead, the sound had been rhythm, measured, deliberate, inevitable. The red light turned green. She emerged, weapon low, posture unchanged. She holstered her pistol with a single motion and exhaled once. No triumph, no emotion. She looked calm, ordinary, as if she'd just finished adjusting a filing cabinet. The range officer's voice crackled through the speakers. Range clear. Time on target 2.7 seconds. All round center mass and head box. Hostage secure. All shots clean. The words echoed like gunfire. 2.7 seconds. The kind of time whispered about in locker rooms, never witnessed. Reynolds' face drained of color. "No way," he muttered. "Run the simulation again." But the Admiral was already descending the metal stairs. His boots hit the concrete with a heavy finality. Every cadet snapped to attention. He walked past Reynolds as if the man were invisible. Stopped before Anya. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. No salute, no words, just shared memory. Then Hayes spoke, voice low, rumbling like distant thunder. "Report." Her reply was precise, emotionless. 2 hostiles, 1 hostage. Entered left, sliced the pie. First hostile, 5 meters, thoracic cavity, 2 rounds. Second hostile, 7 meters, partial cover behind hostage, step-out shot, 2 rounds, cranial ocular cavity. Hostage secure, no collateral. The air tightened. The cadets had trained for months on that same scenario and still fumbled under pressure. She executed it like a machine built for one purpose. Hayes turned to the technician. "Pull up her file." The massive display flickered to life. Name: Sharma Anya. Rank: Chief Petty Officer. Unit: Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The room froze. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Reynolds whispered, "No, she's a SEAL." His voice was a ghost of itself. The screen scrolled. Deployments 14. Navy Cross. Silver Star ×3, Bronze Star with Valor ×5, Purple Heart ×2. Paragraphs vanished under black redactions, classified lines that spoke louder than the words visible. Every award was a story they'd never hear, every omission a secret that could fill volumes. Admiral Hayes faced them. "You were not observing a recruit. You were watching one of the most decorated operators in naval special warfare history." Silence. A different kind now, not awkward, not cruel. "Reverent." He turned slowly toward Reynolds. "Cadet Lieutenant Commander," he said, voice measured. "Do you have a question about the performance of this sailor?" Reynolds swallowed. "Sir, it's just not a standard result." Hayes' gaze hardened. "You're correct, it's not, because she's not a standard sailor." He let that hang, heavy as the air before a storm. Then to the cadets, "This is what a warrior looks like, quiet, professional, deadly." He turned back to Anya and did the unthinkable. He saluted. The sound of his hand snapping up cut through the silence. "Chief," he said quietly, "thank you for the demonstration. It was instructive." Anya returned the salute, her expression unreadable. "Any time, Admiral." The lesson was complete, but its echo was only beginning. Reynolds stood frozen, the enormity of his mistake pressing down until his knees felt weak. He had humiliated himself in front of a legend, and worse, before the next generation who had looked to him for leadership. As the Admiral left, the cadets turned toward Anya. No one spoke. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others just stared, trying to reconcile the plain, quiet woman before them with the myth that had materialized on the screen. Anya didn't linger. She simply walked past them, boots whispering across the concrete, the faint scent of gun oil trailing behind. She paused by the door just for a heartbeat, and then she was gone. Only the echo remained. That night they'd replay it in their minds, the laughter, the silence, the pops. They'd remember the way she didn't flinch, didn't boast, didn't even seem to care. They'd realize something their instructors had never been able to teach. The most dangerous person in any room is rarely the one talking. And somewhere, alone in the quiet of her quarters, Anya sat on the edge of a narrow bunk, disassembling the M17 in silence. Piece by piece, like meditation. Each part placed in line, slide, barrel, spring. Her mind was blank, her breathing steady. The echoes of the day faded, leaving only the stillness that lived in the center of her. To her, it had been nothing more than a drill. But for them, for Reynolds, for every cadet in that room, it was the day arrogance met truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why couldn't he sleep? Hours after the demonstration, Reynolds lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, the hum of the base generators filling the silence like a low confession. The fluorescent light overhead flickered every few seconds, each pulse a reminder of the red light above the kill house door. 2.7 seconds. That number haunted him like a ghost whispering at the edge of his thoughts. He turned over, jaw clenched, sheets tangled around his legs. He replayed it a dozen times already. The way she moved, the precision, the calm, every moment mocked the arrogant certainty that had once defined him. He had thought he was teaching a lesson in humility. He just hadn't realized who the student really was. Across the base in the visiting quarters, Chief Anya Sharma sat at a metal desk. A single lamp glowed beside her, its light catching the edge of the pistol she was cleaning. The weapon was stripped down, laid out with ritual precision. Slide, barrel, frame, spring, every part inspected, wiped, reassembled. Her hands moved without thought, her mind elsewhere. She didn't think about Reynolds or the cadets or even the admiral. She thought about silence, about what it cost to earn it. Years of missions had taught her that the loudest men in a room often vanished first. The ones who talked about how brave they were, how ready they were to kill, they broke when the shooting started. The quiet ones survived. They listened. They observed. They acted. And yet, as she stared at her reflection in the weapon's slide, she wondered when quiet had become isolation, when professionalism had turned into distance. She had once believed that competence would always be recognized, that skill spoke louder than anything else. But years in the shadows had taught her differently. Sometimes the world doesn't hear silence until it roars. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. She didn't look up, enter. The door opened just enough for a young cadet to step inside, barely 20, nervous, cap in hand. "Chief," he stammered, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for earlier." She set the pistol down, eyes lifting to him. "For what?" He swallowed, for laughing, for not seeing. Her expression softened just slightly. "You saw what you were trained to see," she said. "That's the problem with training. It teaches patterns. It doesn't teach people." He nodded, eyes wide, unsure if that was forgiveness or a lesson. Anya leaned back in her chair. "Tell me something, cadet. Why did you laugh?" He hesitated. "Because everyone else did, and because I thought you didn't belong." She gave a small, almost invisible smile. "And now? Now I'm not sure I belong." For a long moment she studied him. The honesty disarmed her more than any weapon could. "Good," she said quietly. "Doubt is the beginning of wisdom." He left the room without another word. She watched the door close behind him, then returned her gaze to the weapon on the table. The reflection looked back at her, calm, expressionless, steady. But inside, a ripple of emotion stirred. Maybe the Admiral had planned this all along. Maybe he'd known what the cadets needed wasn't another lecture on tactics. They needed a mirror. Some mirrors don't flatter, they reveal. The next morning the kill house was quiet, stripped of yesterday's noise. The air smelled of cordite and cleaning solvent. The red light above the door was dark now, its bulb cold. But something had changed in the space. The arrogance that had once filled it had evaporated overnight, replaced by a humbler energy, an awareness of ghosts. Reynolds arrived early. No swagger this time. His uniform was perfect, but his eyes were tired, hollow in a way that spoke of something deeper than sleeplessness. He stood before the plaque on the wall, bare brass, unmarked except for a faint scratch from a stray round. He stared at it like a confessional. He didn't hear the footsteps behind him until a familiar voice spoke. "Can't fix arrogance overnight, Commander." He turned, the Admiral. Hayes looked the same as always, worn, unshakable, his presence filling the room without effort. Reynolds stiffened. "Sir, I—" Hayes raised a hand. "Don't. I'm not here for apologies. I've heard enough of those in my career." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You made a mistake. You owned it. That's rare." Reynolds frowned. "Sir, what was she even doing here? Someone like that, why bring her to a place like this?" Hayes studied him for a moment. "Because this place forgets. Every generation thinks it invented competence. Every new crop of cadets needs to be reminded what quiet mastery looks like." He glanced at the door of the kill house, and because she said yes. "She volunteered?" Reynolds asked, surprised. The Admiral nodded. "She didn't come to show off. She came to serve. She always does." There was a pause. Hayes's gaze drifted toward the observation deck. "You know, I've seen her under fire. I've seen her pull men twice her size out of burning wreckage without a word. She's not loud, she's not emotional. But when everything falls apart, people turn toward her. Not because she talks, because she doesn't need to." Reynolds absorbed that in silence. He'd spent years learning tactics, chain of command, leadership philosophy. None of it had prepared him for what humility felt like. When the Admiral left, he remained standing there, staring at the steel door. For the first time, he saw it differently, not as a boundary between safety and danger, but between pride and truth. That afternoon, the cadets gathered again for drills. The same faces that had laughed yesterday now stood silent, waiting for orders. There was a tension in the air, not of hostility but of awareness. A lesson had taken root, invisible but alive. Reynolds stood before them, clipboard in hand. His voice was quieter, stripped of performance. "Today we start over," he said. "We do the same scenario, but before you breach, you'll say one thing to your team, just one, something that matters." A hand shot up. "Sir, what do you mean, something that matters?" He looked around the room, eyes landing on the young cadet who had gone to see Sharma the night before. "I mean something you actually believe. Something you'd say if you didn't know anyone was listening." The room went still. One by one they began. Simple phrases: "I've got your back, don't miss your corner, stay calm." And one voice, quiet, steady, said, "Don't underestimate anyone." That one lingered. After the exercise, Reynolds found himself alone again in the control booth. He stared down at the maze of walls below, imagining her ghost moving through them, fluid, silent, perfect. He could still hear the rhythm of her shots. The memory wasn't humiliation anymore. It was guidance. In another building, Anya walked the narrow corridors toward the Admiral's office. Her steps were slow, unhurried. She didn't wear the aura of a legend, just the fatigue of someone who had been too long in the field. Hayes looked up as she entered. "Chief, sit." She didn't. "Permission to speak freely, sir." He smiled faintly. "You always do." Her eyes met his. "You shouldn't have used me like that." Hayes leaned back. "Used you? I came here to train, not to humiliate a man in front of his cadets." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You didn't humiliate him. You revealed him. There's a difference." Anya shook her head. You could have taught him that lesson yourself. No, Hayes said quietly. Not like you could. You reminded them all what discipline looks like. That's rarer than you think. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Anya said softly, "You know what the real problem is, sir. Everyone wants to be the loudest voice in the room. No one wants to be the quiet standard others measure against." The Admiral smiled sadly. "And yet, you've been that standard for years." She didn't reply. He looked at her for a long time, then asked, "Tell me something, Chief. After all those years, does it ever get easier?" The silence. She thought about it. The question wasn't tactical, it was personal. And it hit harder than any firefight. "No," she said finally. "You just get better at carrying it." The Admiral nodded, as if that was the only answer that had ever made sense. When she left, the sunlight outside was blinding. She paused at the edge of the parade ground, eyes adjusting. A group of young cadets jogged past, laughing, their boots thudding in rhythm. For a moment she saw herself years ago, another generation, another arrogance waiting to be tempered by truth. She smiled faintly, not out of pride, out of understanding. Everyone learns eventually, some through failure, some through fire. And some in exactly 2.7 seconds. How fast does a story travel? Not the kind printed in newspapers or written in reports, but the kind that lives on in whispers, the kind born from shock, silence, and awe. By the end of the week, everyone on base had heard about the kill house. They called it different names depending on who told it, the lesson, the drill, the humbling. But soon one title began to stick, the Sharma drill. Nobody remembered who said it first. Maybe it was one of the technicians who'd watched the footage frame by frame, trying to believe it wasn't edited. Maybe it was one of the cadets, still haunted by the 2.7 seconds that tore through their pride like shrapnel. Whatever the origin, the name caught on. Because it wasn't just a story anymore, it was a mirror. Chief Anya Sharma had already left the base by then, quietly, without ceremony, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, boots scuffed and silent on the tarmac. No goodbyes, no photographs, just a woman returning to the shadows that had shaped her. But legends have a way of staying behind long after their creators are gone. Inside the barracks, the cadets spoke about her in fragments. She didn't even flinch. She cleared 2 targets in under 3 seconds. An admiral saluted her. The details changed in each retelling, but the truth remained untouched. She had walked into a room built to break people and walked out untouched. Reynolds sat alone most nights now. He didn't avoid the others, they avoided him. He had become the ghost of his own reputation, the warning carved into the walls of the facility. Every new cadet arrived having already heard about him, the instructor who mocked a SEAL and lived to regret it. And yet, there was no bitterness in him anymore, only a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. He spent his nights reviewing the footage from that day, slowing it down frame by frame, watching the way she shifted her stance, the subtle twist of her wrist, the way she kept her head perfectly still while her eyes did all the work. He wasn't looking for mistakes, he was looking for meaning. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath the humiliation, he had begun to understand. That level of mastery wasn't built in a day. It was carved out of pain, out of patience, out of years of listening more than speaking. He didn't want to be like her out of envy. He wanted to learn from her because she was everything he'd pretended to be. 3 weeks later, Admiral Hayes stood in the same observation deck, his reflection merging with the glass as another group of trainees ran a hostage scenario below. It wasn't the same anymore. There was no laughter, no swagger. Every movement was measured, respectful. Even the way they entered the room, controlled, deliberate, echoed her technique. Hayes watched, arms folded, a faint satisfaction tugging at the corner of his mouth. Reynolds appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. "Times are improving, sir," he said quietly. "Average breach down to 6.3 seconds. accuracy up by 17%. Hayes nodded. That's good, but numbers aren't everything. Reynolds hesitated. I know, sir, but they're listening now. They're watching differently. The Admiral gave him a sideways look. And you? Reynolds drew in a breath, gaze fixed on the cadets below. I'm still learning, sir. Hayes studied him for a moment. Good answer. Then he looked back through the glass. You know, the chief didn't come here to embarrass you, Commander. She came because I asked her to remind this place of something we'd forgotten. What's that, sir? That professionalism isn't loud. The Admiral turned to leave but paused at the door. You're doing fine, Reynolds, but don't try to imitate her. Find your own quiet. Reynolds nodded slowly, the words settling like seeds in his mind. Somewhere far from the academy, in a nameless desert at dawn, Anya knelt beside a small campfire. The horizon was painted in pale gold, the air dry and silent. Around her, a team of special operators checked their gear, men who knew her name only through rumors and briefings, not through ego. She sipped cold coffee from a tin mug, eyes scanning the distance. Her body was still, but her mind was moving, mapping, calculating, planning. The simplicity of it soothed her. In the field, things made sense. There were no lectures, no applause, no arrogance to navigate, only precision. A younger operator, barely 30, approached. Ma'am, Chief, he corrected quickly. We're set on coordinates. She nodded. Good, keep radio silence until we hit phase 2. He hesitated. Ma'am, if I may ask, is it true what they say about you, the kill house thing? Anya didn't answer immediately. She finished her coffee, set the mug down beside her and said, Stories grow, skills don't. He frowned, unsure if that was a denial or a lesson. She stood, pulling her rifle strap over her shoulder. It's not about time, she added, voice quiet but firm. It's about trust. You trust your training, your instincts, and the people beside you. Do that, and 3 seconds is an eternity. The young operator nodded, understanding only part of what she meant. The rest would come later, through exhaustion, failure, and silence. They moved out moments later, fading into the rising dust. Back at the academy, the legend of the Sharma drill had begun to evolve. It wasn't just a story of skill anymore. It had become a parable. Instructors used it during lectures on judgment, humility, and leadership. Cadets whispered about it before training, some touching the metal door of the kill house for luck, others staring at it in dread. And every time someone mocked a fellow trainee, someone else would mutter quietly, careful. She might run the Sharma drill on you. Reynolds didn't discourage the talk. He let it breathe, let it live. He knew myths had their place, but privately he began something else, a quiet change. He introduced a new training policy, competence evaluation without bias. Every cadet, regardless of gender or background, was rotated through leadership roles during simulations. Every voice was heard in debrief. Every mistake was analyzed, not ridiculed. The results were immediate. Team cohesion improved. Performance under stress stabilized. And slowly, the laughter that once filled the halls was replaced by something better, respect. Still at night, he often found himself walking the halls alone, his steps echoing in the empty corridors. Sometimes he'd pause before the range door, staring at the cold steel surface, waiting for something he couldn't name. Maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding. One night, he noticed something new taped beside the door. A single sheet of paper. A printed target. 2 perfect double taps, center mass, head box. The grouping so tight it could be covered with a coin. Underneath, someone had written in marker. 2.7 seconds, quiet professional. Reynolds felt the words like a pulse beneath his ribs. He didn't know who had placed it there, but he didn't need to. Some lessons don't fade. They anchor themselves into the walls. He reached out, touched the edge of the paper gently, and whispered, "Thank you." Weeks turned into months. The cadets who had witnessed that day began to graduate, scattering to ships, submarines, and squadrons across the world. Each carried a fragment of the story with them. Each retelling stripped away a little arrogance, added a little truth. And somewhere in a small Navy outpost, a junior officer walked into a classroom of fresh recruits, smiled faintly, and said, "Before we begin, let me tell you a story. It's about a chief, a door, and 2.7 seconds." The legend spread not because it was spectacular, but because it was true. It spoke to something deeper, the quiet heartbeat of professionalism that lived inside those who served not for glory, but for purpose. And though she never sought it, Chief Anya Sharma had become a compass. Her silence had become a voice carried by others. In every room where respect was earned through action, not rank. In every decision made without bias. In every soldier who chose humility over ego. That was her victory. Not the drill, not the applause, but the quiet shift in 1,000 unseen hearts. And though she would never know it, every time a cadet whispered her name before breaching a door, they were, in their own way, saluting her. Why did he come back here? That question followed Commander Reynolds as he stepped out of the car and stared at the gray silhouette of the training facility. The kill house stood at the far end of the compound, its concrete walls streaked with years of weather and memory. The brass plaque beside the door caught the afternoon sun, the engraved words glinting faintly, the Sharma drill. He ran his thumb over the edge of the metal, feeling its coolness, its weight. Years had passed since that day, but the air around this place still felt charged, like the residue of gunpowder and revelation still lingered in the walls. The command had offered him other posts, promotions, easier assignments. He'd declined them all. He didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not until he felt he'd done what he came here to do. The door creaked open behind him. A voice, young, uncertain. "Sir, are you the one who trained under Chief Sharma?" He turned, a new cadet, barely 20, face still unscarred by experience. Reynolds nodded once. "No one trains under Chief Sharma," he said quietly. "You just survive her example." The cadet blinked, unsure how to respond. "Sir, is it true she did it in under 3 seconds?" Reynolds looked at the plaque again. "That's the number," he said, "but time wasn't the point." The young man hesitated. Then what was? Reynolds smiled faintly. "Respect." He walked away, boots echoing softly across the concrete, leaving the cadet staring at the plaque like it might start speaking. In another world, a world of dust, heat, and silence, Chief Anya Sharma crouched in the shadow of a crumbling wall. The desert wind tugged at her sleeve, carrying the faint scent of cordite and diesel. Her rifle rested against the stones beside her, its metal warm from the sun. The mission was simple on paper: extract a downed pilot before enemy reconnaissance reached the crash site. Simple, but simplicity was a liar. In her experience, every easy mission had teeth. Her team, 4 operators, all younger, moved with the cautious precision of men who knew their lives depended on her calm. They called her Chief or Ma'am, never Anya. Out here, names didn't matter, only competence. She scanned the horizon through binoculars. Heat shimmered off the sand, turning distance into illusion. Nothing moved. That was what bothered her. "Movement?" one of the men asked. "Negative," she murmured, "and that's the problem." The man frowned. "Ma'am." She lowered the binoculars. "The desert's never still. If it's quiet, it's thinking." He didn't understand, not really. He didn't have to. Understanding came later, sometimes too late. They moved at dusk, shadows slipping between broken dunes. The wreck appeared like a skeleton against the fading light. The jet's frame half buried, metal twisted, black smoke curling weakly into the air. Anya knelt beside the open cockpit, scanning for signs of life. The pilot was still strapped in, unconscious, bleeding but alive. She checked his pulse, steady but faint. "Evac zones 2 clicks north," one operator whispered. "We can carry him." Anya nodded. Do it, move quiet, they're close. How close? She listened, really listened. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of an engine far off. Her eyes narrowed. Too close. They started moving. The night swallowed them whole. Back at the academy, Reynolds stood in the lecture hall addressing a new class of cadets. The lights were low, the atmosphere heavier than most training sessions. He didn't pace anymore, didn't bark. He spoke softly, and because of that, every word carried more weight. "I want you to remember something," he said, his voice steady. "The uniform you wear doesn't make you a warrior. The noise you make doesn't make you confident. The only thing that earns you respect out there or in here is competence." He paused, eyes moving across the young faces. "You'll hear about the Sharma drill. You'll think it's a story about speed, precision, heroism. It's not. It's about humility. It's about how easily arrogance can blind you to greatness standing right in front of you." He let that hang, silent as a gunshot. A hand went up. "Sir, what happened to her?" Reynolds smiled faintly. "She went back to doing what she does best." "And what's that, sir?" He looked toward the kill house. "Being quiet." In the desert, quiet wasn't peace. It was warning. Anya could feel it, that slow tightening of the world before contact. She signaled her team down behind a ridge. The pilot moaned softly as they laid him on the ground. She placed a gloved hand on his shoulder. "Stay still. You're okay." Through her scope, she saw the faint movement of lights on the horizon. Dust trails, vehicles. They'd been tracked. She exhaled, steadying her pulse. 2 trucks, maybe 3, small convoy. Pattern suggests a pincer approach. Her second-in-command swore under his breath. "Options." "None," she said simply. "We hold." They dug in, forming a half-circle around the injured pilot. There was no panic, only acceptance, the kind born of experience. Anya's heartbeat slowed, her breathing controlled. She'd been here before. Different places, same silence. And always the same truth. Stillness was not fear, it was control. The first truck came into range. She waited until she saw faces, clear silhouettes before firing. The rifle cracked once, a flash, then silence. Her team followed, each shot measured, deliberate. When the dust settled, the convoy lay disabled, burning quietly in the night. "Clear," one of the men said softly. Anya lowered her rifle, eyes still on the horizon. "No, it's never clear, let's move." They carried the pilot toward the extraction zone, the first faint light of dawn painting the desert gold. She didn't look back. There was no victory here, only survival. Weeks later, the footage from her mission reached Admiral Hayes's desk. He watched it alone, replaying the thermal drone feed, the calm precision, the control under fire, the silent leadership. Nothing dramatic, no yelling, no panic, just execution. When the video ended, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "Still writing lessons without a word, aren't you, Chief?" He opened a folder beside him. Inside was a single letter, a request from Commander Reynolds. "Sir," it read, "I would like to formally request to retain the Sharma drill as part of the annual leadership curriculum, not as combat footage, as doctrine." Hayes smiled faintly, signing the approval. "Looks like you started something, Chief." Months passed. The brass plaque by the kill house door had changed. Below the words "the Sharma drill," someone had added a single engraved line. "Respect is earned in silence." Cadets touched it before entering the kill house, some out of ritual, some out of superstition. No one knew who had added the words, but no one dared remove them. Reynolds continued to teach, his tone steady, his patience endless. And though his name was never attached to the legend, his transformation became its quiet echo, proof that one moment of humility can rewrite an entire life. He often wondered if she knew what she'd left behind here. If she'd ever think about the laughter that turned into reverence. If she'd ever understand that the real legacy of that day wasn't in her precision. It was in the way it reshaped others. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But every time a new cadet walked through those doors, nervous, proud, unsure, Reynolds saw her shadow there. The reminder that strength never needed to announce itself. And sometimes, late at night, when the lights in the training hall flickered off one by one, he'd stand alone in the kill house, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty anymore, it was alive. The silence she left behind. When does a moment become a legend? Not when it's written down, not when it's praised, but when it keeps teaching long after everyone involved has gone. Years had passed since the day Chief Anya Sharma walked into that kill house. Yet her presence lingered in the drills, in the silence before every breach, in the way young officers carried themselves when they thought no one was watching. They called it the Sharma Standard now. New cadets whispered about it in the halls before their first exercise, voices hushed with reverence. If you can clear the course under 5 seconds, they say you're close. Close but never equal, because no one ever was. The plaque outside the kill house had been polished so many times that the engraved words shimmered like a medal. Respect is earned in silence. And beneath it, a simple brass frame held the same faded paper target from that day. 4 bullet holes. 2 center mass. 2 in the head. Tight enough to cover with a coin. For the new generation, it wasn't just history. It was a standard of being, an ideal whispered across mess halls, discussed quietly between drills, passed from mentor to recruit like a sacred code. And at the center of it all was Commander Reynolds, older now, quieter, his once arrogant posture replaced by calm gravity. His voice carried the weight of someone who had been broken and rebuilt the right way. He stood before a new class of cadets one morning, hands clasped behind his back. "Before we begin," he said softly, "I want you to understand something. The kill house isn't about speed or violence. It's about truth. It shows you who you really are when no one is there to save you." He gestured toward the brass plaque. "There's a story behind that name, some of you already know it, but I want you to hear it from me, not the rumor mill." The room fell silent. The hum of the ventilation faded until the only sound was his voice, measured, even almost confessional. "I was there," he said, "the day that name was written." He told them everything, not as a hero, but as a man who once thought he knew what strength looked like. He described the laughter, the arrogance, the way he'd mocked her, and how she had answered without a word. He spoke of the 2.7 seconds that rewrote everything he believed about leadership. He didn't hide his shame. He didn't soften the truth. He made himself the villain of the story because he had been. When he finished, the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. He looked across their faces, seeing curiosity, awe, and something rarer, reflection. "Leadership," he said quietly, "isn't about being obeyed. It's about being worth following." No one moved. No one spoke. He let the words settle before adding, almost to himself, "If you ever forget that, the kill house will remind you." Halfway across the world, in a small, wind-worn compound nestled against a mountain range, Anya Sharma watched the sunrise through a cracked window. Her hair had begun to gray at the temples, her face leaner, the lines deeper. But her eyes, sharp, assessing, unyielding, hadn't aged a day. The radio beside her crackled softly with encrypted chatter. Another mission briefing, another rotation, another day. "Chief," a voice called from the doorway. One of her team leaders, broad-shouldered, respectful without being afraid. "Ops wants confirmation for the next drop. You good?" She nodded, "Always." He hesitated before speaking again. "Got a message for you. Came through the comms this morning from the academy." Her brows lifted slightly. "Academy?" "Yeah, they're dedicating something in your name. Some kind of annual exercise. The Sharma Standard, they're calling it." Anya didn't react. She turned back toward the window, the sunlight washing her face in pale gold. "That's unnecessary." The man smiled faintly. Maybe, but necessary or not, they're doing it. Commander Reynolds sent the note himself. At the mention of the name, she blinked once, a brief, private flicker of memory. She hadn't thought of him in years, but the image returned easily. The arrogance in his eyes, the way it shattered into humility. The sound of her own voice giving the after-action report. She'd left without looking back, but maybe she should have. "Tell them I said nothing," she murmured. "Yes, Chief." When he left, she stood there a while longer, hands resting on the windowsill. Outside, the wind moved across the desert, reshaping the sand endlessly, erasing footprints as fast as they were made. She smiled faintly. "Good," she whispered. "That's how it should be." At the academy, the first Sharma Standard competition began that same week. It wasn't a flashy event. There were no medals, no cameras, just a simple rule: complete the kill house with perfect accuracy under stress without losing composure. It was less about score and more about discipline. Reynolds watched from the control room, observing the cadets cycle through. None matched her time. None came close, but he didn't care. That wasn't the point. After the final run, he walked down to the kill house floor. The last cadet stood by the door, breathing hard, weapon still smoking. Reynolds approached, his tone calm. "You did well." "Sir," the cadet panted, "I missed the time." He nodded. "You did." The cadet frowned. "Then I failed." Reynolds studied him, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "Not if you learned something." The young man hesitated. "I did, sir. I learned that calm isn't weakness." Reynolds' smile deepened. "Then you passed." He walked away, and the cadet stood there, unsure whether to feel proud or puzzled. But as he looked at the plaque beside the door, he understood. The lesson wasn't about bullets, it was about presence. That evening, Reynolds sat alone in his office. The walls were lined with framed photos, not of himself but of his students, some in flight suits, some in fatigues, a few gone too soon. On his desk, an envelope waited. The paper was coarse, creased, marked by the dust of distance. There was no return address, only his name written in careful, neat handwriting. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. He unfolded it slowly. "Commander, they tell me you've been teaching well. That's good, keep teaching. The next generation won't remember me. That's fine. But if they remember what they learned from you, that's enough. Quiet doesn't mean absent. Sometimes it just means you've already said everything that needed saying." Yes." Reynolds stared at the letter for a long time. There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. He could hear her voice in every word, calm, clipped, precise. He read it again. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket over his heart. He looked up at the window, watching the dusk settle over the compound. The lights from the kill house flickered in the distance, the red glow steady and familiar. He smiled softly. "Still teaching," he whispered, "even from 1,000 miles away." Far away, under another sky, Anya sat with her team by a dying fire. The night wind whispered through the sand, carrying the faint echo of laughter, hers, quiet and rare. Her second-in-command nudged her gently. "Chief, what's funny?" She shook her head, "Just thinking about something." "Something good." She looked up at the stars, their light cold and clear. "Something finished." He didn't ask what she meant. Some things didn't need explaining. As the flames burned lower, she reached into her pack and pulled out a small, folded paper, a printout from the Academy Bulletin. The SHARMA Standard, inaugural year complete. She studied it for a long time before feeding it to the fire. The edges curled, glowing red, then turned to ash. She watched the smoke drift upward, disappearing into the endless night. "Good," she murmured again. Because legacy, she knew, wasn't about being remembered. It was about leaving something that didn't need your name to survive. And for her, that was enough. How long does a lesson last? A week, a year, a lifetime. For the Navy cadets who walked through the steel doors of that kill house, it had been decades. But the lesson of the Sharma drill was still alive, carved into their reflexes, their choices, their silence. It had become more than a story. It had become doctrine. The brass plaque gleamed under new lights now, polished daily by hands that didn't even know who had first placed it there. Above the entrance, digital boards listed scores, times, simulations. But there was one line that had never changed in 20 years. Sharma drill, 2.7 seconds perfect. No one had ever beaten it. No one ever would. The academy had evolved, its technology sharper, its drills faster, its weapons smarter. But the heart of its training, the standard of humility, still came from that single moment in time. And Commander Reynolds, now older, gray at the temples, eyes lined with a quiet kind of peace, still walked those same halls every morning before sunrise. He moved slower now. The years had taken some of his strength, but not his presence. His students said they could always tell when he entered a room, not because of his voice, but because of the stillness that followed. The kind of silence that carried authority. He once been a man of ego. Now he was a man of example. Each morning he stopped by the plaque, ran his hand across the words, and whispered the same thing under his breath. Still teaching. That spring, the academy prepared for its annual graduation ceremony. A new generation of officers, men and women who had grown up hearing of the Sharma standard, were about to take their oaths. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Reynolds stood backstage, reviewing his notes for the final speech of his career. Retirement orders already signed. After this, he'd be gone. He looked out through the curtain at the rows of faces, the sunlight glinting off polished caps and dress whites. Every face filled with confidence, hope, the fire of beginnings. And he smiled, because he saw something in them, something he hadn't seen in his own class years ago. Humility. He felt it in the way they stood, the way they looked at one another. The lesson had endured. "Commander," a voice said softly behind him. He turned. The admiral, older now but unmistakably the same, Hayes. Still sharp, still steady. "Sir," Reynolds said, standing straight. Hayes nodded. "Big day." "Yes, sir." "Last one, huh?" Reynolds smiled faintly. "Feels strange. I've been here longer than most of the paint on these walls." The admiral chuckled. "You've done good work, Reynolds. This place breathes differently because of you." "Because of her," Reynolds corrected. Hayes looked at him for a moment. "Maybe, but you gave her silence a voice." There was a pause, not awkward but full. Two men connected by one event that had defined both their lives. Hayes finally said, "I heard you've got a guest in the audience today." Reynolds frowned. "A guest?" The admiral smiled faintly. "Front row, civilian clothes, you'll know when you see her." Before Reynolds could respond, Hayes clasped his shoulder. "Go give them their last lesson." The stage lights were warm as Reynolds stepped up to the podium. The crowd of cadets straightened, rows of white uniforms gleaming like waves. He took a moment before speaking, his eyes sweeping across the sea of faces. "When I stood where you are now," he began, "I thought leadership was about being right, about being strong, about being first through the door." He paused. "I was wrong." A ripple moved through the audience, not discomfort but curiosity. "I learned that lesson right here in this building, in front of a woman who didn't say a word to defend herself, because she didn't need to." He gestured toward the distant outline of the kill house visible through the glass walls behind him. "That day, I watched arrogance fall apart in 2.7 seconds, and in its place, I found respect." The room was utterly still. "Most of you will never meet the person who set that standard," he continued, voice low, reflective. "And that's all right, because you'll meet someone like her, someone quiet, someone unassuming, someone who doesn't demand attention but commands it, And when you do, I hope you listen." He stepped back from the podium for a moment, letting the silence fill the space. Then he smiled, a small, honest smile. Because that's silence, that's where real leadership lives. Applause rose, deep and sincere. He exhaled slowly, lowering his head, overwhelmed not by pride but gratitude. Then, as the clapping softened, his gaze drifted to the front row, and he froze. A woman sat there. Plain gray jacket, dark hair streaked with silver, posture straight, eyes calm. For a heartbeat, he thought it couldn't be. Then she nodded once, a subtle, familiar gesture. Chief Anya Sharma. His breath caught. The world seemed to narrow around that single moment, every sound fading until there was only the quiet hum of the air between them. She didn't smile, she didn't need to. Her eyes said everything, "You learned." He stepped down from the podium as the ceremony ended, his steps unsteady with emotion. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something sacred in the air. When he reached her, he hesitated. "Chief," he said softly, his voice breaking just slightly. She tilted her head. "Commander." They stood like that for a long moment, two lives connected by a single day, a single lesson. "You came back," he said. "I was in town," she replied simply. He almost laughed, still understated as ever. "Still talking too much," she countered, her tone dry but warm. They both smiled then, quietly, almost shyly. He gestured toward the plaque through the glass. "They made it official. Your name's part of the curriculum now." "I heard," she said. "I didn't ask for that." "I know, but you earned it." She regarded him for a moment. "And you?" He exhaled, still trying to live up to it. For the first time in years, her expression softened fully. "You already did." The words hit him harder than any reprimand, any medal, any salute. Because they came from the one person whose opinion had once crushed him, and now, quietly, saved him. They walked together toward the kill house. The building looked older now, its concrete scarred and chipped, but the plaque still gleamed. Anya stopped before it, tracing the engraved words with her fingertips. "It's smaller than I remember," she murmured. "Everything is, once you stop being afraid of it," Reynolds said quietly. She glanced at him, and for the first time her eyes betrayed something human, not sadness, not pride, but peace. "You know what I've learned over the years," she said softly. "What's that?" "That silence doesn't mean nothing. It means enough's been said." Reynolds nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Then I guess this is enough." She gave a faint smile. "It always was." They stood there in silence, two shadows cast across a floor that had once echoed with arrogance and gunfire. Now it held something else, legacy. As they turned to leave, Reynolds glanced back one last time. The plaque shimmered in the setting sun. He thought of the countless cadets who would come after them, touching that medal before their first breach, whispering her name without knowing her story. And he realized something profound. It didn't matter if they knew. Because the lesson wasn't hers anymore, it was theirs. Sometimes greatness doesn't echo through history. It hums quietly, in every act of respect it leaves behind. And that was enough for both of them. When a lesson becomes timeless, it no longer belongs to the one who taught it. Years after the ceremony, the name Sharma had become more than a standard. It had become instinct, a phrase whispered before missions, a silent rule among soldiers who'd never met her but lived by her discipline. Across the world, in jungles, deserts, cities, and seas, men and women moved with the same calm precision she had shown that day in the kill house. They didn't speak her name loudly. They didn't need to. Because respect in silence had become a culture. Commander Reynolds retired a year later. No speeches this time. No medals pinned on his chest. He requested it that way. He didn't want another ceremony. He'd already had his closure, standing beside the one person who had unknowingly rebuilt him. He moved to a quiet coastal town, a place where gulls cried over empty piers and the ocean sounded like breathing. His house faced the sea. His days were simple: morning coffee, evening walks, letters from old cadets who still called him sir. And every so often, an envelope with no return address would appear on his porch. Inside, a single line, handwritten in the same neat script. "Still teaching." He would smile every time, fold it carefully, keep it in the same drawer where he'd stored her first letter all those years ago. He never wrote back. She hadn't asked him to. Their conversations had always been silent anyway. Far away, Chief Anya Sharma continued her quiet work, no longer in combat, but in instruction. The military rarely announced her assignments. She moved between training units like a ghost, 1 month in the Middle East, the next on an aircraft carrier in the Pacific. She had no formal title now, no rank on her shoulder, just presence. Her reputation spread through rumor, not record. Cadets whispered that the legendary Sharma Standard instructor had been seen at Camp Talon, that she could dismantle a rifle blindfolded, that she could read fear in a recruit before they spoke. None of them knew it was her. Not until she spoke. And when she did, soft, clipped, steady, something changed in the room. One day, after a particularly difficult exercise, a young lieutenant approached her during debrief. Sweat ran down his face, and frustration trembled in his voice. "Chief," he said, "how do you stay calm when everyone's watching, when you're the one they expect not to fail?" Anya looked at him quietly. "You don't stay calm because they're watching," she said. "You stay calm because if you lose yourself, you give them permission to lose themselves too." The lieutenant frowned. "So you fake it." She almost smiled. "No, you remember what matters. You breathe, you move, you act. The rest doesn't matter." He nodded slowly, the words sinking deeper than he understood. Later, as he cleaned his weapon, one of the other trainees asked, "What'd she say to you?" He looked up, thoughtful. "That calm isn't the opposite of fear. It's proof you've made peace with it." The others fell silent, because that felt like truth. Years passed, wars came and went, faces changed, but the Sharma drill remained untouched, still unbroken, still perfect. It was no longer just a test of marksmanship. It was a rite of passage. Every graduate had to face it. Some succeeded, most didn't, all remembered it. One cold morning, long after Reynolds had retired, the academy received news of a combat mission gone wrong in a border conflict. An entire reconnaissance team had been pinned down, ambushed, and surrounded. Their commanding officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Rhea Carter, made the impossible decision to lead a countermove that saved all but one of her men. When the rescue footage reached the Academy's archive, Reynolds, now gray, older, slower, watched it on his home screen. He leaned forward, studying her movements frame by frame. The controlled breathing, the lack of panic, the way she issued orders with clarity and restraint. He smiled slowly. He knew those patterns. A note appeared in the mission file: Carter Rhea, graduate of the Sharma Standard Program, Class 23A. He sat back, exhaling softly. "Still teaching," he whispered. Months later, the Academy decided to honor the fallen members of that mission with a memorial service. Veterans and instructors from decades past were invited. Among them, Commander Reynolds, now 73, walking with a cane, but with the same steady presence that once defined him. He arrived early, before the speeches and flags drawn to the old training field. The kill house still stood, though weathered by time. The concrete was cracked, the walls repainted, the plaque still gleaming. Someone had added new words beneath the original engraving. "Respect is earned in silence, and silence never dies." Reynolds stood there for a long time, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. Then he heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind him. He didn't turn, he didn't need to. "Didn't think you'd miss this," came a familiar voice, older, lower, but unmistakable. He smiled without looking back. Wouldn't have missed it for the world. Anya walked up beside him, dressed in civilian gray, hair streaked completely silver now. The years had carved her face, but her eyes were still fierce. They stood side by side, watching the light move across the brass. "They've added to it," she said quietly. He nodded. "They've earned it." She glanced at him, studying the lines on his face. "You look tired, Commander." He chuckled softly. 73 will do that." She tilted her head, still walking tall. "Still teaching," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "Always." They walked together to the memorial field where hundreds had gathered: cadets, veterans, commanders. None of them recognized her at first. She preferred it that way. She sat in the back row beside Reynolds, unnoticed, unannounced. The ceremony began. Names were read, honors given, stories told, and then a surprise. The announcer cleared his throat. "Today, we dedicate a new section of our training doctrine to the woman who defined humility under pressure, and whose standard continues to shape every officer who passes through these gates. The Sharma Doctrine." The crowd erupted into applause. Anya's breath caught just slightly. Reynolds looked at her. "You didn't know?" She shook her head. "I told them not to." He smiled. "They didn't listen." Her gaze stayed fixed on the podium. "Good, they shouldn't." As the applause faded, the commander on stage read the inscription. "Strength doesn't demand recognition. It leaves a path of dignity behind, one quiet act at a time." Reynolds turned to her. "That sounds like something you'd say." She looked down, her hands folded in her lap. "Maybe it's something you remembered." They both smiled. When the ceremony ended, people began to recognize her, quiet murmurs spreading through the crowd like wind through tall grass. But before anyone could approach, she stood. "Leaving already?" Reynolds asked. She nodded. "Too much noise." He laughed softly. "You'll always be the quiet one." She looked at him for a long moment. "And you'll always be the loud one who learned to listen." He grinned. "I'll take that." They clasped hands, once firm, silent, the kind of handshake that spoke more than words could. Then she turned, walking toward the fading light, her figure small but steady against the horizon. Reynolds watched her go, the ache in his chest not from age but from gratitude. He whispered almost to the wind, "Thank you, Chief." She didn't turn. She just lifted a hand in silent acknowledgement, the same motion she'd made that day, long ago, when arrogance fell silent. He stood there until she disappeared. The kill house behind him glowed in the sunset, the brass letters catching the last of the light. And in that golden reflection, he saw not the past, but the echo of every cadet who had walked through those doors, calm, steady, humble. The legacy lived on. And silence, her silence, kept teaching. How do you measure a life? By medals, records, stories told in rooms long after you're gone? Or by the things that last when your name is no longer spoken? For Commander Reynolds, it was none of those. It was the quiet routine: morning coffee, the sound of the ocean, the echo of discipline that never left his bones. He lived simply. No honors on the wall, no visitors except the occasional former student, now a commander or instructor themselves, dropping by to thank him. He never spoke much. He didn't have to. When they asked how he stayed so calm, he would smile and say, "I learned from someone better." He'd always say it softly, as if the sea already knew her name. One winter morning, the waves were loud, crashing against the rocks outside his porch. Reynolds sat wrapped in a wool blanket, a cup of black coffee in his hand, eyes on the horizon. The sunrise was pale, streaked with cold light. A letter sat on the table beside him. The handwriting familiar. He reached for it with trembling hands, the arthritis stiff in his fingers. "Commander, by the time this reaches you, I'll be far from any signal, training unit in the mountains. New generation, same mistakes. Same pride to break. It never ends. You'd like them, though. They still quote you. They don't even know they're quoting you. If this is the last time we write, I want to say this. You did what you were meant to do. You turned a lesson into a legacy. That's more than most ever manage. Stay calm, keep teaching, always. Yes. He set the letter down gently. The words blurred as his eyes filled, but the feeling was peace, a deep, settled peace. He leaned back in the chair, listening to the sea, the waves folding in slow rhythm like breathing. And he smiled, because he could almost hear her voice again. That evening the caretaker found him still sitting there, coffee cup empty, letter folded neatly in his lap, a faint smile frozen on his face. The tide had come in, the sea had taken the shore. He was gone. They buried him at the military cemetery overlooking the ocean. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a flag folded with precision and a small brass plaque that read, Commander Nathaniel Reynolds, teacher, student, servant. Still teaching. It was Anya who had chosen the words. She stood alone at the edge of the service, hands in her pockets, wind tugging at her hair. When the final salute was fired, she didn't move. She waited until everyone had left. Then she stepped closer, tracing the letters on the plaque with a bare fingertip. Still teaching, she whispered, even now. She placed a single spent casing from her rifle at the base of the stone, polished, silent, perfect, then turned and walked away. Time moved on. The academy changed again. New technology, new wars, new names. But in every corner of its halls, echoes of their lessons remained. In the kill house, the brass plaque still gleamed, older now, edges worn from countless hands brushing across it before missions. Beneath the old engraving, a newer edition. The Reynolds Sharma Doctrine. Leadership is not power, it is presence. The cadets still touched it before drills, without knowing why. It was tradition now, a ritual older than they were. And when instructors told stories about where it came from, the details varied. Some said she was a ghost, some said she'd been real, some said both. None knew the full truth. But all of them agreed on one thing. The kill house still felt alive. Sometimes in the dead hours before dawn, the security cameras would catch small anomalies, a flicker of light, a shadow where there should be none, a faint echo of footsteps when the building was empty. The maintenance crews joked that it was haunted. The instructors didn't laugh. They'd just smile quietly and say, "That's the chief doing inspections." Half a world away, in a remote mountain range, Anya Sharma sat by a campfire, her rifle beside her, listening to the wind howl across the peaks. Her hair was white now, her face lined like folded maps of the places she'd been. She wasn't young anymore, but she was still herself, precise, calm, unshaken. A young recruit across the fire finally spoke up, nervous but curious. "Ma'am, what was he like, Commander Reynolds?" She poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the dark. "He talked too much," she said quietly, then softer, but he learned when to stop. The recruit smiled. "They say you trained him." She looked into the flames, eyes reflecting their light. "No, life did. I just happened to be there when it started." They sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, the kind that carried weight. When the fire burned low, the recruit spoke again. "Ma'am, what do you think makes a good soldier?" Anya didn't answer right away. She took a slow breath, letting the night settle around her. Then she said, "Someone who knows when not to fight." The young man frowned slightly. "Not fight." She nodded. "There's strength in restraint. Anyone can pull a trigger. It takes a soldier to decide when not to." He thought about that for a long time, the meaning sinking deeper than any textbook lesson ever could. When he finally looked up again, she was still staring at the fire, still, calm, silent. And he realized that maybe the most powerful people he'd ever meet would be the ones who didn't need to prove it. Years later, when the world had changed again, new conflicts, new peace treaties, new uniforms, a historian compiling stories of the Academy's most influential figures came across two names linked forever by a single phrase. The Sharma Standard. He tracked records, searched for files, even requested declassified documents, but there were almost none, only fragments. A training video with no date. A letter archived under leadership doctrine. A faded plaque inscription. He closed the file eventually and wrote in his notes. No verifiable photographs, no official citations, only testimonies. The legacy appears to be entirely cultural, passed from memory to memory. No clear beginning, no end. He paused before typing the final line. Perhaps that's the point. And somewhere, maybe nowhere near any base or battlefield, an old woman sat on a quiet porch overlooking an empty valley. She was wrapped in a gray shawl. A small brass casing rested on the table beside her. And beside it, a folded piece of paper, the last letter she'd ever written but never sent. The words were simple. Still teaching. The wind picked it up, carried it off the table into the open air. It floated for a moment, weightless, before disappearing into the endless blue. She didn't chase it. She just smiled faintly and closed her eyes. The valley was silent. But it wasn't empty. Because somewhere across continents, in classrooms, in missions, in moments of fear or decision, her lesson still breathed. And if you listened carefully, you could almost hear her voice carried by the wind. Soft, steady, certain. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.